So today I have flush sanded all of these planks that were sticking out at various distances across the dash. Really happy with the look of it. We'll get over here. You can see it's a very slight arc, just a very slight arc. Now, if this dash were straight up and down, that should be a straight line, but as you take an arc and you start to lay it anywhere off a perpendicular, it creates its own curve. So the more angled that dash is, the more pronounced that curve is going to be. But I'm actually really, sorry about the extension cord here, I'm really happy with the look of it. And there's still a little bit of fine touch-up. But I got that done today. I also sanded the ply that was overhanging. Let me get way down in here. I sanded that back to flush on both cockpits, both sides. So front cockpit, sanded flush up here, or sanded flush over there. Same on the rear cockpit, sanded flush over there, sanded flush on this side. And then I, of course, brought my corners all the way out to flush where they were, about an 1/8 inch off back here. So I got all those sanded. I didn't bother again with the bridge deck. I'll wait until I get all of the planks across it to do it, both sides. I didn't bother with this section, same thing. I'll wait until I get planked all the way across. Now I can do the motor well because all of the interior planks are glued down on the motor well. So I'll probably do that tomorrow, sand the face flush, sand around the sides flush. But that's where we're at. We're making good progress. We got our order of epoxy grip coming. It's coming out of California. It's not too far away. So a few days we'll have that, and I can finish gluing down deck planks. But in the meantime, I worked on getting some of this interior cockpit edge sanded, and I think to burn up some more time, I'll go ahead and pre-fit the next 4 planks, and I'll start sanding the shear line, the overhang, and back here at the transom as well. I'll probably get all that sanded flush. I got to pull my cut water so I can continue around the bow, but that's what we did today, making good progress. I think it looks pretty damn good. So here's an update. We are currently just now finished gluing down the last 2 planks on the entire deck. We're completely done gluing planks down. So I just applied the glue and screwed these down snug. You can see I've got tiny little spacers pushed down in the crack to maintain the gap in strategic places. But here we are, done. And we'll come back, we'll take a look at the rear. It turned out really nice. I'm very happy with it. And then you can see how the stripe will come down the side here and then wrap behind the planks. So looks really good. So now that I've got these last 2 gluing up, when the glue dries, I'll get all the screws and fender washers out and the clamps off of them. And then I can sand the interior edge of the cockpit flush here and for the seat back, also for the seat back here and inside the motor well. I can get all that sanded flush, and then we'll continue around the outside on the shear, get that all sanded flush, and we'll start longboarding the deck. So we are making fan-damn-tastic progress. I am very happy with the look of it. Planking's officially done, at least glued down. There's still quite a bit of work left on it, but there we are. Well, today we're working on the sanding of the interior cockpit edges, and I tried something that I was a little hesitant to do, but I just decided to hell with it. We're going to do it, and I did, and it turned out pretty darn good. So all of these planks across the seat back, they were all overhanging at various distances, and I had planned on using my belt sander kind of set on the face of that to sand across there to get that angle. But there was a decent amount of overhang all the way across, and I thought, man, I'm going to sand forever. Chances of me burning through the epoxy coat here were very high, which isn't a big deal. It's a seat back. It's just epoxy encapsulation. I could just roll on another coat when I coat the deck, but I wanted to eliminate that possibility. So what I did was I set up my router with a flush trim bit with the bearing on the bottom, and I set that bearing just below the 1/4" ply here. Now, that's not going to produce the 12-degree angle, but what it's going to do is it's going to level all of those planks all the way across. You can see how the seat back's leaning like this, but these planks are still, let's see, seat back planks are straight up and down. So basically, I took off a decent amount of material with that flush trim bit. The reason I was afraid to do that was because at the end of each plank, you know, with the rotation of the cutter, I was afraid it was going to try to chip out the away edge as I was routering across that. That's pretty common for a router. So what I did was I just fired it up and I cut into it and then moved fairly decent until I got right to the edge, and then I'd move really slow. And then I'd cut into the next one, move fairly decent and slow down right at the edge, trying to minimize any tear out on the end grain at the, you know, the where the bit exits the plank and enters the next plank. And it turned out flawlessly. I couldn't believe it. I didn't get any tear out, which is pretty surprising. So what that did was that got me 90% of the way fared. Now I just have to come back and I'll hand sand this that 12 degrees to get the correct angle. And this is exactly like it came out of the router. Back here, I have started hand sanding that, and let me get the seat back in there. You can see it's the exact same angle as the seat back. This from this side, the rear cockpit seat back, over to about the 3rd plank is sanded to match that same angle, and it turned out beautiful, really nice. And I did the same thing with the router back here, just to knock down 90% or so of that sand work. So, you know, it only took me about 20 minutes to hand sand half of this here. I did the interior of the motor well the exact same way. We're now flush out here. And this is just epoxy coat still, so I didn't mind if I roughed it up a little bit with my sanding block. But I set my flush trim bit to this plywood and then just routed across the edge of it. On the sides, I set my flush trim bit to the mahogany veneer here and cut it flush to that. So then that left a spot from here to here that I just took my belt sander, the end of it, stuffed in that corner and just kind of feathered the two together, and it turned out really good. We also have, hopefully it will focus, the back of the boat sanded off flush. Holy crap, that looks good. Look at that. So I got both sides sanded off flush, and then I sanded off, because the flush trim bit, I had to stop right in this corner. I had to hand sand this last little bit here. But it turned out super clean. I'm very, very happy with it. Same with the other side. It's the same way. I've got a little finish sand to do right here. You can see where this is flush, but there's a shiny spot. Flush here, a little shiny spot. So a little more finish sand here, but it looks really good. Super, super happy. And now you can see the edge of the transom dead on. Same with this one here, where the two planks met out here somewhere. There was, you know, they were staggered, offset. Now it's a perfectly straight line. So the motor well's done. The back of the transom is 98% done, just a little bit of touch up. The rear cockpit seat back is probably 80% done. Basically from the second plank over, I got to finish. I'm just making my way around. Now I built a sanding block specifically for this part, so I didn't damage, you know, when I'm sanding, let's say this edge, I didn't want to take too much of this epoxy coat off. So what I did was I built this little sanding block, and I stuck it in my table saw, and I took about a 32nd off of this side, an 1.5 inch deep, which is the exact width of my emery cloth, so that the surface, if I were to just wrap this with sandpaper, the sandpaper would be the thickness of the sandpaper taller than the wood is. Which would result in being easily able to accidentally sand into this surface, and I didn't want that. So I basically ran my blade down it like this, taking about a 32nd or so off, so that when the sandpaper's on here, this is perfectly flush across it. So I use basically the wood as a guide. I can slap the wood right on the side here, and it's perfectly flush. And it doesn't sand into the bottom material unless I slide this down some. but it does a really, really good job of flush sanding this stuff back here. I couldn't believe it. This was something I came up with or thought about the other day. Hopefully you can see it's just perfectly flush across the top. The top of the sandpaper is flush to this piece of wood, so it's almost like a guide. So it sands it down super, super flush. I'm sure I'm not the first guy to ever think of that, but man, what a great, neat little tool. This is my new favorite sanding block for flush sanding. So that's where we're at. We'll continue on. I'll finish the seat back. Same thing with the router up here. I flush cut it with the bearing riding across the plywood. So there's just very little touch-up sand and this part's done. But that's where we are. Making good progress. So what we're looking at here is a jig I built for my DeWalt compact router. Basically to speed up the process of fairing the overhang all the way around the shear. And this is what I came up with. This little jig here. You can see there's a pencil line. That's where I set the bearing. It's about an 1/8 inch off of that fence. And then I added a strip of wood at the top of the fence. Same thickness, about an 1/8 inch. And the purpose of that, when we set this guy in the hole, so what I do is I keep that little wood strip tight against the bottom of the hull. I'll run this guy up till the bearing hits and then start sliding it down, just like so. The important thing to remember here is to always keep that wood strip tight against the hull. You don't want to accidentally, let's say we just hit the bearing there, you don't want to rock and pull that strip off the hull. If you do that, you'll start damaging, you'll start eating into the shear and it won't be at the same angle. So long as you're careful and take your time, keep this wood strip at the bottom always tight to the hull and just rock it up till your bearing touches and then slide it down the hull. That's how I faired that off. Because it's a flush trim bit, let me focus. There we go. Because it's a flush trim bit, it's basically flush when you're done, and I just lightly hit it with sandpaper. You can see some of the scuffs here. Where it might have been sticking out just a hair, but I wanted to make that fairing go a little faster. Focus. There we go. So that's what I did. So we're done up around the tip now. It's hand sanded from about this joint forward on both sides. I would say complete up here. I'm going to finish hand sanding down this side, hand sand down the other side, and I'll step back again and start looking at that curve. And if it looks funky, little touch up and step back and look at it. And again, when I'm satisfied that it's fair, then I'll come and I'll round this edge over. But I took a break from doing the cockpits to work on this shear line. Making good progress. So I've been doing some work on the front cockpit seat back, and it should be pretty noticeable here. Half of this bridge deck seat back, front cockpit seat back, has been sanded at 12 degrees. You can see the seat back, and then right here, it makes a little S curve and dogs over. That's where I haven't sanded, that S curve, basically the port or left side of the boat. And you can see it in the planks. So now I've got to continue sanding the other side. Making good progress. Well, it's officially December 1st, 2017. For the month of November 2017, we went up 21.5 hours. Decent hours in November. Hope everybody had a good Thanksgiving. We went up $117.54 this month. So of that 21.5 hours, 9 of that went into the deck. So that brings us up to 95.75 hours into the deck. Basically, that's the highest hours of any part in the entire boat build so far. Got more time into the deck than anything else. And that's cutting and fitting planks. And then we had 12.5 hours that went into fairing. So I added that up here. So a total of 48 hours into fairing so far. So I'll come over that $117.54. That brings us up to $9,370.97, and 21.5 hours brings us up to 873.5 hours into the Zip total. So we're creeping up on that 900-hour mark, but let's take a look. Let's see where we're at. Here's where we're at. As you can see, I've got this shear sanded all the way around. Just like I talked about, I sanded everything by hand back to flush, and then I started taking a look at it and looking for any waves or anything like that. Little touch-up sanding, and step back and look at it. And you can see now it is a very smooth, very fair curve all the way up to the tip of the bow. Both sides, both the port and the starboard side, I sanded flush. And then I came back and I looked at them, and a little touch up here and there. And after I was satisfied that they were as fair and as smooth as possible, then I rounded over this corner. So it's no longer sharp. It's a nice smooth corner. Hopefully you can see that when you look at the tip back here. And I just eyeballed that all the way around the boat. So we'll come up here. Hopefully it'll focus. Yeah, it's hard to tell because it's in a shadow, but you get the idea. So that is hand rounded over all the way around. It's smooth, it's not sharp anymore, and it's done that way on both sides, both shear lines from the tip of the bow to the transom. They're rounded over and smoothed over. So the shear lines are officially done. I mean, it is what it is. I'm very happy with them. They're very, very fair, very smooth. Turned out great. Both cockpit seat backs are sanded to 12 degrees and flushed off, both the front cockpit and the rear cockpit. So they turned out very, very nice. The dash planks for both cockpits, they're all sanded smooth and flush for the rear and the front cockpit. The interior edges here are sanded smooth and flush, both cockpits, both sides. I went ahead and finished where we had a couple of shiny spots back here. This is all flush sanded now, my end caps on the transom, both sides. So that's done. After I got the seat back sanded and the dash sanded, the end grain, the end of the planks, then what I did was I took a look at this little corner here and took my belt sander, stuffed it in there, and just started smoothing it out until I was really happy with the radius, till it looked good. I then took a piece of, we'll come over here, marine ply. What do we got here? Starboard front cockpit, so this one must be starboard rear cockpit. So anyhow, after I got this to a curve I was satisfied with that looked good, I then made a pattern that fits in there nice and tight. I drew that out, cut it out, sanded it to fit, and then I flipped it over, and I went over to that side and I matched it so that the cutouts were exactly the same, left to right. I did the same thing for the front cockpit here. If we take this guy and slip it, slip it in there, you can see it's a perfect fit. So same thing, I took my belt sander, I smoothed that out until I was happy with the curve to how it looked. Then I made a pattern, took the pattern over to the other side and shaped it so that they're identical. So I believe, with the exception of rounding over this cockpit edge, and I'll only round it from here back to here, and I haven't decided how much rounded I want, but it'll get rounded some. I don't know if it'll quite be as extreme as the outside of the hull or not, but with the exception of rounding over this edge on the front cockpit and the rear, I think the cockpits are done. I think they're fully sanded. The shear line is 100% done. The transom is done. So really, for the month of December, I need to just focus on sanding the top of the planks, the top of the deck, smoothing them all out in both, front to back, left to right. So that's where I'm going to continue on this month. With any luck, I can get some epoxy coats on this thing. Maybe some striping, I don't know. Again, I hate setting expectations because it seems like I always miss them, but it shouldn't be a problem to get some epoxy coats on the deck anyhow. As always, this time of year, you know, Christmas is coming up in a few weeks. Things slow down for me as far as the build goes. But it shouldn't be any problem to make some progress on it anyhow. So as a heads up, my Glen-L epoxy grip showed up. It might be hard to tell, but we're currently sitting at about 13 ounces. Each one comes with 16 ounces. So I use 3 ounces of each to finish gluing down the deck planking, or 6 ounces of epoxy. So it's right at what I calculated to finish gluing down the deck planks. But I'm very, very happy with the look. It's looking great. It's turning out nice. Really, really happy with the round over. As you can see, I pulled my cut water off so I could fare around that, but it's looking beautiful. So now we're on to sanding the planks fair, level, and smooth, and then we'll get some epoxy on this thing. Because the time of year, it's getting very, very cold. We're starting to dip into the high 30s at night, and humidity, because it's raining a lot, humidity's over 90%. Both of those are bad, bad, bad for epoxy. At least for a clear finish epoxy. So I think, much like I did when the hull was flipped over and I was doing the bottom paint, I built a little painter shanty with some bisqueen over the top and built basically a little painter shanty inside my garage. I think to do the epoxy coats, I'll go ahead and sand it like it is. I'll get the boat completely vacuumed out, cleaned, wiped down. I think I'm going to set up a little painter shanty to do the epoxy coats and stuff a couple of heaters. You can see I've got one over here. But I'll probably stuff a couple of heaters in here and run it for 5 or 6 hours before doing any epoxy coat. I mean, ideally, I'd like to be at about 65 or 70 degrees to do the encapsulating epoxy. So that's where we're at. We're making fan-damn-tastic progress. I hope you guys, because I won't see you until next year, hope you guys have a safe and happy, Merry Christmas. Thank you for watching. Don't forget, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please subscribe, rate, and comment. And we'll see you guys next year with the next update of Building the Zip.